Arif's life starts to unravel as the nightmares become more vivid and intense. He stops sleeping, terrified of what awaits him when he closes his eyes. One day, he discovers a mysterious old diary belonging to his late grandmother. The entries detail a similar experience, a nightmare that would haunt her every night. The last entry warns of a shadowy figure that crosses the boundary between dreams and reality. Arif's nightmares escalate until, one fateful night, the line between his dreams and the real world blurs completely. He wakes up, but the forest is still around him, the fog thicker, and the presence closer than ever. The nightmare has followed him into reality, and now there's no waking up. Arif's screams echo through his empty house, but no one hears. He is trapped forever in a world where nightmares don't end, and waking up is no longer an option. This story can be expanded with eerie descriptions, building a sense of dread and adding shocking twists to keep the reader on edge. Let me know if you'd like to add more details or need help with the narrative. Arif's descent into his nightmares becomes a daily struggle. As the nights go on, his grip on reality begins to weaken. At work, he's caught staring into space, his eyes vacant and distant. Friends and family grow concerned, noticing the dark circles under his eyes and the nervous energy that never seems to leave him. One evening, Arif decides to confront the nightmare head-on. He sets up cameras in his room, hoping to capture any evidence of what's happening while he sleeps. That night, the dream is different. It's darker, colder, and more suffocating than ever before. The trees in the forest seem to lean in closer, their gnarled branches reaching out like twisted hands. The presence is no longer just following. It's breathing down his neck, whispering unintelligible words that send chills down his spine. When he jolts awake, he checks the footage. To his horror, the video shows his sleeping body twitching and turning violently, as if something unseen is attacking him. But it's what happens next that chills him to the core. A shadowy figure, shapeless and dense like smoke, appears at the foot of his bed. It lingers there, watching him, before slowly fading away. Arif realizes that the nightmare is no longer confined to his sleep. It's manifesting in his waking life. Desperate, Arif seeks help from a spiritual healer who tells him that his grandmother's diary was no ordinary journal, but a record of a curse passed down through generations. The nightmare is a malevolent spirit, a jinn that latches onto the fear of its victims and grows stronger with every terrified gasp and every sleepless night. The healer warns Arif that the only way to break the cycle is to confront the entity in his dreams. But Arif isn't sure he has the strength to face something so terrifying. Arif prepares himself for what he hopes will be his final encounter with the nightmare. He drinks a concoction given by the healer that will keep him lucid in his dream, giving him control over the environment. As he falls asleep, he finds himself back in the foggy forest, but this time he's not running. He calls out to the presence, demanding it show itself. The fog parts, revealing a towering shadow with glowing red eyes. A figure so grotesque and monstrous that it defies comprehension. The entity lunges at Arif, its smoky tendrils wrapping around him. The air is thick with the stench of decay, and Arif feels his breath being sucked away. But instead of succumbing to fear, he fights back, reciting the prayers the healer taught him. The forest shakes, the ground cracks, and the shadow begins to disintegrate, releasing an ear-piercing screech as it vanishes into nothingness. Arif wakes up gasping, his body free of scratches and bruises for the first time in weeks. He feels lighter, relieved that the nightmare has finally ended. However, as he rises from his bed, he notices something unsettling. His reflection in the mirror doesn't match his movements. The figure in the glass stands still, its eyes slowly glowing red. Arif realizes with growing dread that the nightmare isn't over. It has found a new way to haunt him, this time from within. The story ends with Arif trapped in a waking nightmare, his reflection watching him, waiting for the moment it can take over. The reader is left with the unsettling realization that some nightmares can't be escaped. They evolve, finding new ways to torment. Arif's mind begins to unravel as he grapples with the horrifying truth. The nightmare has not ended, it has merely changed form. His reflection in the mirror becomes an ever-present reminder of the entity's lingering presence. Whenever Arif glances at a reflective surface, he sees his reflection behaving strangely, smiling when he isn't, blinking when his eyes are wide open, and sometimes just staring back with those eerie, faintly glowing red eyes. Arif's fear grows as his reflection starts to act independently, mocking him with twisted smiles and gestures when no one else is around. The more he tries to avoid mirrors, the more his surroundings seem to conspire against him. Shiny surfaces, glass windows, and even the screen of his turned-off phone reflect back the sinister version of himself. Constantly lurking, waiting, Arif isolates himself, refusing to leave his apartment, his paranoia deepening. He covers every reflective surface, even going as far as to shatter his bathroom mirror, but the distorted version of himself finds new ways to manifest. On his TV screen, on the surface of water in his sink, and even in his dreams. He begins to hear faint whispers in the silence, voices that taunt him with phrases like, "You can't hide forever," and "I'm always watching." One night, exhausted and on the verge of collapse, Arif tries to seek comfort in his grandmother's diary once more, hoping there's something he missed. As he flips through the pages, he notices that the entries are changing. The ink is fresh, and new words appear as if being written before his eyes. The diary now tells of a final confrontation, a warning that the entity feeds on his fear and that it will eventually take his place in the real world. The last line reads, "Only one can remain." Determined not to lose his sanity or his life, Arif sets up a desperate plan. He turns his apartment into a battleground, lining the walls with protective symbols and lighting candles to ward off the darkness. He confronts his reflection directly, daring it to emerge. The room grows colder, and the lights flicker as his reflection steps out of the mirror, becoming fully corporeal. It's Arif's doppelgänger, but twisted. Its smile is cruel, and its eyes burn with a malevolent hunger. The two clash violently. Arif's doppelgänger is stronger, faster, and seems to anticipate his every move, taunting him with his own voice. As the fight escalates, it becomes clear that the entity is not just trying to kill Arif. It wants to consume him, to fully replace him in the real world. The candles are snuffed out, plunging the room into darkness, illuminated only by the flickering red glow of the creature's eyes. With his strength waning, Arif recalls the healer's words, "It feeds on your fear." Summoning every last ounce of courage, Arif stops fighting physically and instead confronts his terror head-on. He steps toward the creature, refusing to look away, showing no fear. He begins to chant the prayers, louder and more defiantly, until the creature starts to flicker and distort. The entity lets out a bone-chilling scream, thrashing violently as it's pulled back into the mirror. Arif feels a rush of air as the doppelganger is sucked away, shattering the glass into a million pieces. Arif collapses, gasping, feeling the weight of the nightmare lifting from his chest. But as Arif sits amidst the shattered glass, he notices something horrifying. Each shard reflects a different version of him, some screaming, some staring blankly, and others smiling with that all-too-familiar sinister grin. He's won the battle, but not the war. The entity is splintered, but not gone, lurking in every piece of broken glass. Arif lives in constant vigilance, knowing that even the smallest reflection could let the nightmare return. Every mirror is a potential door, every shadow a lurking threat. The nightmare has not been destroyed, just fragmented, always waiting for the moment when fear will invite it back into his reality. Arif's story ends with a chilling reminder. Some nightmares cannot be defeated, only contained. The reflection is never truly gone, just waiting for another crack to slip through. Arif's victory over the doppelganger is hollow. Though the entity is shattered into countless reflections, it has left behind a lingering darkness that shadows Arif's every step. As days pass, he starts noticing unsettling changes in his surroundings. Doors creak open on their own, objects shift positions when he isn't looking, and shadows in his apartment seem unnaturally long and dark, almost as if they're reaching out toward him. Arif's paranoia grows into a consuming obsession. He installs surveillance cameras in every room, determined to catch any sign of the nightmare's return. But the footage offers no comfort, it only deepens his dread. The recordings show faint flickers of movement, brief glimpses of shadowy figures darting just out of sight. On some nights, his own reflection can be seen lingering in mirrors long after he's walked away, as if watching him from the other side. Arif's reflection becomes increasingly malevolent, taking on a life of its own. At first, it's small things. A smile that doesn't match Arif's own, eyes that move independently, tracking him with a predatory gaze. But soon the reflection starts appearing in places it shouldn't. In puddles on the street, in the shiny surface of a spoon, even in the eyes of strangers passing by. It's everywhere, always watching, always waiting. One night, Arif dreams of a vast, endless corridor of mirrors, each reflecting a different, twisted version of himself. He runs down the corridor, but the reflections begin to step out, one by one, their hands reaching for him. They pull him into the glass, and he finds himself trapped, staring out from inside a mirror, banging desperately as the nightmare version of himself grins back at him from the outside. Arif wakes up screaming, drenched in sweat, but the terror feels too real. He rushes to the bathroom, staring at his reflection, waiting for it to move. It does. The reflection smiles slowly, eyes glowing faintly red, before mouthing words that Arif can't hear but instinctively understands. It's your turn. Arif's sense of reality continues to deteriorate. He stops eating, barely sleeps, and refuses to leave his apartment. He tries to cover all the mirrors again, but something always uncovers them. Sometimes he wakes up to find the sheets pulled away. Other times, they're ripped apart, as if clawed by unseen hands. The reflection taunts him, sometimes whispering his deepest fears and failures, sometimes simply staring with a knowing, sinister smile. Arif's last shred of hope is to destroy the mirrors completely, but no matter how many he breaks, the reflection always returns, finding a new surface, a new way to appear. One day, exhausted and broken, Arif sees his reflection not in a mirror, but in the reflection of his own eyes in a photograph. The eyes move, blinking and smirking, confirming his worst fear. The entity has now become a part of him, embedded in his very being. Arif decides he can't live like this any longer. Armed with every prayer, charm, and talisman he's collected, he prepares for one final showdown. He smashes every reflective surface in his apartment, leaving just one mirror in the center of the room, surrounded by a circle of salt and candles. He stares into it, ready to face the entity once and for all. The room grows unbearably cold, and the candles flicker as the reflection begins to change. The twisted doppelgänger emerges, but this time it's not alone. Every mirror he's ever shattered, every reflection he's ever seen, comes pouring out. An army of nightmarish versions of himself. They circle him, chanting in a language he doesn't understand, their voices merging into a deafening cacophony. Arif fights back, reciting every prayer he knows. But the reflections close in, their hands reaching, pulling. He feels himself being dragged toward the mirror, his body growing numb as the entity starts to consume him, replacing his soul with darkness. Just as he feels himself slipping away, Arif gathers the last of his strength, shattering the final mirror with a desperate scream. When the dust settles, Arif is alone in the wreckage of his apartment, surrounded by broken glass. The candles have burned out, and the room is silent. But as Arif looks around, he sees faint ghostly images of his twisted reflections trapped within each shard. He has managed to trap the entities back in the glass, but at a price. His mind is fractured, just like the mirrors around him. Arif lives on, but he's forever haunted. Every time he glimpses his reflection, no matter how small or fleeting, he sees the nightmare lurking back at him, waiting for the day when the glass will break again. The story ends with Arif staring into a tiny piece of broken mirror, his reflection smiling back, whispering, "I'm still here." The nightmare is never truly over. It's merely waiting for its next opportunity. Arif tries to piece his life back together, but the fractured reflections haunt him at every turn. He avoids mirrors entirely, but it's not enough. The entity's presence is no longer confined to glass. It seems to seep into everything. Shadows flicker at the edges of his vision, and he hears faint echoes of laughter and whispers just beyond the reach of his senses. Arif's apartment, once a sanctuary, now feels like a prison. Every corner holds a sense of dread, and every flicker of light seems to hint at something lurking just beyond. He begins to see his twisted reflection, not only in mirrors, but in other people's eyes, in the shiny surface of his phone, and even in his dreams, where it grows more vivid and threatening each night. One evening, Arif decides to venture out, hoping that being around other people might provide some respite. But the outside world has changed too. Faces in the crowd seem distorted, with expressions that are slightly off. Smirks where there should be smiles. Eyes that follow him even after he's passed by. He catches glimpses of himself in shop windows and car mirrors, each reflection more sinister than the last. The worst comes when he sees his doppelganger fully formed, standing across the street, staring directly at him. It's not just a reflection, it's a perfect copy of him, except for the eyes, still glowing faintly red, filled with malice. The figure does move, but simply raises a hand and waves mockingly before disappearing into the crowd. Arif's heart pounds. He feels hunted. No matter where he goes, the doppelganger appears, taunting him, growing bolder each time. It begins to mimic him perfectly, stepping into his actions and even attempting to speak with his voice. Arif tries to confront it, but it always vanishes just before he can reach it, leaving only echoes of laughter that chill him to the bone. Arif's mental state continues to deteriorate. He begins to question his reality, unable to tell what's real and what's a manifestation of the nightmare. The entity starts playing tricks on him, altering small details in his environment. Furniture subtly rearranged, clocks that run backward, and voices that call his name in the dead of night. One evening, Arif receives a call from his mother, but the voice on the other end is his own, distorted and mocking. "You're losing yourself," it taunts. "Soon, there'll be nothing left of you." The call ends abruptly, leaving Arif in a state of panic. He checks his phone, but there's no record of the call. He starts to doubt his sanity, wondering if the doppelganger is not just a separate entity, but a manifestation of his own fractured mind. Arif decides that there's only one way to end this. He must confront the entity in the place where it all began, his grandmother's old abandoned house. Armed with the few remaining items from the healer and the torn pages of the diary, Arif returns to the house, now shrouded in decay and overgrown with vines. The air is thick with the scent of mildew and rot, and the atmosphere is heavy, as if the house itself is alive and watching him. Inside, Arif is met with a nightmarish vision. The walls are covered in mirrors, all reflecting not just him, but countless versions of his doppelganger, each more twisted than the last. They all smile at him, their eyes glowing, and in unison, they speak, "Welcome home." Arif knows he has to end this now. He recites the prayers, the symbols he learned, and steps toward the largest mirror, where the true doppelganger stands, arms crossed, waiting. The room grows cold, and the mirrors start to ripple as if made of liquid. The doppelganger steps forward, merging with the real Arif in a terrifying confrontation of will. The battle is a war of minds. Arif against his deepest fears, his guilt, his anger. The doppelganger fights to consume him, feeding on every doubt and every moment of weakness. But Arif fights back with everything he has, forcing the doppelganger into the largest mirror. With a final desperate push, Arif shatters the mirror, trapping the entity inside once more. Arif stands amidst the shattered glass, victorious but broken. The mirrors no longer reflect his doppelganger, but the sense of dread remains. The house is silent, but the atmosphere is still heavy, as if waiting. Arif knows he's won, but the cost has been high. His mind is scarred, and the memories of the nightmare cling to him like a second skin. As he leaves the house, Arif glances at his reflection in a small piece of glass embedded in the ground. For a moment, everything seems normal. But then, just before he looks away, he sees a flicker of red in his eyes. He blinks, and it's gone. But the message is clear. The entity is never truly defeated. It's always waiting, lurking in the edges of reality, ready to slip back in at the first sign of fear. Arif's story ends with him walking away, knowing that while the nightmare may be contained, it will always be a part of him. The reflection in every glass surface is a reminder that some battles are never truly won. They just wait for the next opportunity to begin again.